Today on Off the Hinges, relax, pour yourself a drink, and unwind from your week as I answer your questions and share stories about this week's trade. I'm joined by a special guest, and I have my whiskey in hand. I'm so glad you made it. Are you ready? Let's slide into the vault. Happy Friday and almost a weekend to everyone. I have been excited for this episode since we talked about it. And I wasn't eager to rush through the holidays, but I sort of was, to be honest, because I was looking forward to this beyond compare. So I am joined by the unforgettable Alana Nicastro. And oh my goodness, thank you so much for being here. I'm thrilled and honored. Welcome.
Oh, I'm thrilled and honored, and it's a pleasure to be with you and your guests.
Yes.
Anything for you.
Oh my goodness. Well, you are too kind. So before we get started, I do want to just say that Alana works with the U.S. Marine Corps out in 29 Palms. She'll give you a little bit of her story and backdrop, so I won't steal her thunder. But of course, I'm in the military as well, in the Marine Corps. So nothing that we say is supported by or representative of the Marine Corps, the Department of Defense. This is just a Josh and Alana conversation. So we have crossed paths and continued our relationship thanks to both of us working with and being in the Marine Corps. But yeah, this is just two friends. So that disclaimer has to go up front. But I would love for you to start by just telling people, what's your story? Introduce yourself.
Oh, what's my story? Well, first of all, I, such a good question and a grand question, but I'm going to keep it really simple. My story is I just um, follow God's will for me. I pray continuously about the work that I do, especially with Marines. And I feel blessed to be in the company of Marines and to co construct the work that I do to help them become better prepared for the work
Mm,
that they do for all of us. Um, just like how I met you, I want to say we're going on 8 years in Quantico.
yeah, that's very true. That was back at it was with Training Education Command. And that
Correct.
was you were working at McTaug, and then I know you had a break and then you went back, but we were both there for a um it was transforming the learning environment. It was a planning conference
Yeah.
for the commanding general of TECOM, and we were there with our respective elements. I was working with School of Infantry West at IULTC as this company commander there. You were working with McTaug, and that's how our paths crossed. So yeah, we can jump into that a little bit later, but oh my goodness, it doesn't feel like it's been 8 years. And then sometimes it feels like it's been 2 decades. I don't even really know what
Exactly.
time it is anymore.
That's right.
Whew.
Yeah.
Yes. So I always start with these questions and then we'll jump into the questions for today.
Oh, okay.
And you know these because these are how we always start our conversations anyway.
Oh,
So out the
okay.
gates, what are you thankful for?
Oh, I'm just thankful to be here with you and to participate in this conversation.
Mm, me too. And you told me, you sent me a message about there's a lot of fires in LA area. And I normally
Yes.
just let the guests share this, but I will just say I'm very thankful that, first of all, you are safe. Definitely prayers and thoughts to the people that are being devastated by whatever's happening out there in California right now in LA. And I'm just very thankful for my livelihood and a roof over my head and safety for my family. Cause I mean, nothing's guaranteed and natural
No.
disasters can happen and nobody's immune to it. So I'm just very thankful for safety and security right now that can be fleeting, but definitely prayers and thoughts to, I'm sure a lot of your friends and my friends in that surrounding area right now. That's wild.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's heartbreaking, and
Yeah.
extending the prayers to them is worthwhile right now. They need them.
Yeah. Okay. I'm excited for this one with you because this is right up your alley. What are you learning this week?
Oh my goodness, so much. I think just with what's going on in Los Angeles with the fires, just how fragile things are. Um,
Hmm.
that's been kind of an ongoing thing for me these past few days. So that's, like I said, it's heartbreaking. But I'm learning how to show up in the midst of all of that. personally. So I'm saddened by my friends who have been displaced from their homes, and of course,
Mhm.
offering a place of shelter for them, and what it's like to extend yourself in that way. So, personally, I'm being stretched. And professionally, I am learning a lot about tacit knowing and the work it takes to tap into what we know, felt experience that's often deep within us, and the
Mhm.
kinds of questions that it takes to surface some important things that we may embody that we have yet to articulate with self and others.
Oh, what a great way to package that. Because when you say,
I'm still learning how to talk about it, Josh, to
yeah,
be honest with you. So
well, I'm
thank
still learning how to keep pace with what you talk about. So thank you
you.
for breaking it down for me. I appreciate it. Okay. Last one before we dive into the listeners' questions.
Mm,
How
mhm.
do you hope to grow as you rest and reflect heading into the weekend?
Hmm. Well, is it okay if I talk about faith?
You are the
That's
guest.
such a big
You have the
part
mic.
of my it's a big part of my life. And
Yeah,
so,
of
you know,
course it
it's
is.
a question that what does rest look like? What
Mhm.
does restoration look like from a faith-based perspective? So right now I'm really talking with God, doing my best to have a conversation on um, getting some clarity in terms of the purpose of um, not only the work that I do, but how he wants me to show up for others in my community.
Mhm. I love that. And
Mhm.
yes, you can talk about whatever you want because there is I don't think there is any divergence between life and faith and personal and professional. You and I have talked about a lot of this, but it's all just a matter of our life and what we're placed here to do. And I think when we
No,
try to separate and decouple the things that naturally blend together, it just makes life more clunky and awkward than it should be. So
that's right.
I like that there's a seamless blend for you of how you live in both realms because it's just your life. So I think that's beautiful that you shared that.
And that's where I feel rested when you asked about the rest piece. I really do
Yeah.
feel rested when I'm in his presence,
Yeah. That's perfect.
no matter what I'm doing.
Well, I appreciate that answer. Thanks. Okay. First one, and this is a really good question. So I'm glad someone asked this. It says, what were the both of you most curious to learn about each other the first time you met? And it's funny that you said, oh, when we met, when we were in Quantico, I was like, oh,
Yeah,
that tips a hat to a question someone asked. So like,
that's
I'll let
right.
you go first, ladies first. But what had you curious when we first engaged? That's a great
Well,
question.
yeah. Okay. So if you recall, we were in a small room. It was all military members, and I think just three civilians. Of course, I was the only woman, as usual. Uh,
That's true.
yeah, right. So I typically just watch, right? You know my
Mhm.
approach. I typically listen and observe the interactions. But I think it was your ability to do the same, to hold steady and to ask specific questions, you know. So um, I'm trying to think back to your initial interaction with the group was a question, and that drew me in. And I knew immediately that you and I would connect and work together well in
Mhm.
that planning session and that we would be longtime friends. I knew in that
Oh
moment.
man. I distinctly remember. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I'm I'm so grateful because maybe the first interaction, who knows what that could be with people. That's a
That's right.
powerful question to ask. Like, what were you curious about? But that pulls the thread on so many things because first impressions are so important because when you do cross someone who's so observant like yourself, of course you can
Well,
take
and if
time to
you
get to know someone
recall,
better,
I
but
think it was
that matters.
I feel bad, Josh, because I remember you asking a question and I responded with a question. I think the question was, what are your beliefs
Hmm.
about intelligence and learning.
Yep.
And that just blew things up in the room.
It did. It was so good. But I remember where I was sitting at the table. It was like a U
Mhm.
shape, and I remember where you were. Oh man. But I'm very glad that your first memory is that I actually held a space and asked a question because that's not always the case. So thankfully, that was our first interaction.
That is
Um,
correct. You did.
yes. Okay, I will respond because they asked for both of us. So for me, what was I curious to learn about you? I remember this is interesting. This won't get me in trouble, but it's just a very honest observation. When you go to a lot of these big planning conferences, and it's no different in the military than for our regular corporate friends or going to a big seminar where there are important people that have a lot of rank or status or whatever. You always, so there was a general officer in the room, a lot of senior leaders in the room. And at the time, I was a captain. And you can see maybe some younger company grade or more junior staff officers that will try to flock and gravitate towards the senior leaders. And
Right.
that's not a knock. That's not a bad thing. But especially when there is a civilian woman like yourself in the room, I would venture to guess, and I can confirm this because I was there. No one's going to really engage during breaks or doing, like, hey, coffee break or restroom break. No one's going to engage with the Alanas in the room. They're going to be like, how close can I get to rub shoulders with this person who's either a selected or a scoped out mentor? So there's a lot of angling that happens. And
Right.
it's people dynamics, right?
Yep.
And so I sat back and I watched and I saw you were there with, some of your group from McTog. But I was very curious because during the breaks, I'll normally go to the back of the room. I'll say hi to a few people and I'll just sort of scan the room to be like, who's in here? Like who do I know? Who do I not know? Who looks curious to me? And I remember seeing you and going, oh, I wonder. And I always gravitate towards the civilians, but then I noticed people you were talking to. And I said, okay, this isn't just some random lady. She's here for a reason. And then it was just very, I think, probably very divine that we got put into the same breakout. That's not a random happenstance to me. And I
Hmm.
remember being very curious to be like, I'm just curious what her story is, much like I asked you at the beginning, like, who is she? Where is she from? And then the space that you held. I left that conference with this thought in my mind. And to this day, this is how I think of you. I was like, Alana Nicastro is the queen of a pregnant pause.
Oh,
And
yes.
that's a good thing. Like your ability to ask questions and then just sit there and make people uncomfortable with their own curiosity is brilliant. And that is what resonated. And I was like, man, I need to get to know this lady better. She is just a diamond in the rough. And you were absolutely that in that planning conference. So I was
Right, a
curious.
diamond in the rough, right. And it's funny because
Yeah.
usually it's when you hold that space, when there is that silence, I will wait some time as you've experienced, and I hope I ask this group, how are you using the
Mhm.
silence?
Right. Oh, there's so much value in that. So I noticed that in you. I continue to learn that from you all the time because you're a very good communicator. But yes, that's oh my goodness. So that's what I was curious to learn about Alana. So thanks for the question. That's a great question. I can unpack so much more, but for the sake of time, that's what you
Well,
get.
thank you for the listener who asked that, because
Yeah, I know.
they probably know I don't like to talk about myself. So
Yeah. Well, you have to a little bit though today. That's okay. Um, this is another really good one because I love how things are framed.
thank
So I'm
you.
thankful that someone else asked this and I didn't have to because I was probably going to do it. How do
Okay.
you frame curiosity?
How do I frame curiosity?
Yes, like when you think about it, I think is what they're probably getting at. Like in your mental
Mhm.
model of curiosity, what comes to mind?
Okay, let me imagine a mental model right now.
Okay.
um,
Do it.
I think curiosity is the bridge between understanding and connection,
Mm,
and it's where the unknown. I'm trying to imagine this mental model. I'll have to draw it for your listener. It's where the unknown becomes an invitation for growth, for empathy, for deeper insight. And then the result of that um, is an ongoing journey of discovery. Yeah, an ongoing journey of discovery.
Yeah,
So let's go back. So the frame I would be curiosity is the bridge between understanding and connection.
I love that. Do you have, I'm going to ask my own layer deeper if I can. Do you have an example of where you've seen that play out recently, where maybe there's been a light bulb moment or someone has been very curious and you've seen that bridge and that connection start to be formed with the work that you've been doing?
Yeah, I think I'm really big about dialogue, right? The
Hmm.
importance of having a dialogue. So right now I'm working with regiments, as you know, and
Right.
can they actually enact their plans,
Hmm.
right? So whether or not their plans will translate into successful execution.
Mm.
So, I observe how they interact with one another. So
Right.
your doctrine talks about creating this shared understanding. Well, that has to be intentional.
Right.
And curiosity should it is an essential element to reaching that end goal of shared understanding. So I observe how, like in the command center, um, how it is you're dialoguing, and it is all about understanding and connection of where we're at, right?
Mhm.
And how each member can perform their role well, knowing how it's dependent with other people in the room
Right.
or, at the tactical level, that's necessary.
I had a question that was asked of me, and to honor this Marine, I will absolutely respond. I feel awkward when I take questions that are just to me when I have a guest, but he sent me a question and he said, "Hey, I have a question for you." And it wasn't even directly related to curiosity, but that's the lens I'm viewing everything through. So I will respond to him sort of through that frame. So his question said, "Have you ever felt your personal or professional potential within the Marine Corps was limited due to your rank or billet?"
Mm.
And man, I would love to just sit on this and get on the phone or get on a video call with this guy. And I probably will soon send him back a message for some context of where this came from because I like, oh, I want to know where does this question like originate. So I got a little bit of the context, which is I'll let that stay between him and me. But this is such a great question. And I will say simply to Frank. So Frank used to be an NCO that worked for me in one of the units, and he's a sergeant now. He was a corporal at the time, still in the Marine Corps. Great guy. And that's what I'll leave it so that nobody knows exactly which Frank I'm talking about in my past. But Frank, that was a great question, buddy. And first of all, I'm very impressed at your professionalism, and you are a first class non commissioned officer. So, man, keep crushing it because you're a rock star. But yes, I will say the answer to that question. Have I felt personal or professional potential within the Corps was limited due to rank or billet?
Yeah.
Yes. And I will first say that that feeling doesn't always necessarily mean that my limited potential was a reality. So I will say that feelings don't always drive reality, and feelings definitely shouldn't be driving our purpose or where we are in a certain space. But there have been times where you're placed in a certain spot and you might feel like it's a struggle within that culture or within that climate or within that shop or section or unit you're in, whatever. It might just not be your cup of tea, or it might not be exactly what you feel like you would like to be doing. And I've felt that at times. There have been certain things you're like, ooh. And even things that you maybe thought were going to be great, you show up, and then the dynamic of the military, turnover of different leadership positions or turnover of positions around you, make that dynamic shift from what you've known in the past or what you've heard about. And I'll just say, man, that's the story of people. And it doesn't change in or out of the military. It has its own flavor in every space that you're going to interact with other people. People will cause you to look at certain things that you viewed as a potential, and you might feel like it's limited or it's stifled or you're not being used to your fullest advantage or you don't have the opportunities you would hope that you have. And here's where I'm going to land the plane on curiosity. Because for me, I will say I'm thankful that I was raised to always question in a good way my purpose in a certain space and time, and to view things as seasons. And when I think of this, as you rotate through maybe different positions or different billets, and as you continue to progress, I think of things as a gardener or as someone who would work the land because it's a simple analogy I can appreciate. And there aren't always going to be seasons where you're reaping a harvest or plucking fruit off of a tree. There's going to be times where you're removing barriers from the soil, where you're throwing some seed, where you're working the land, and where you're just having to be patient. And it's not sexy work. And it doesn't seem to the passerby like there's a lot of fruit that you can pluck off. And those when you can pull the fruit or glean the harvest, man, that's a great time. But I think the thankless work of a farmer or a gardener is just as important as the harvest. So for you, wherever you're at, there's a season for everything, man. And that we could go into a lot of examples of that. But wherever you're at, stay curious. Ask yourself, who am I and what is my purpose as a human? And what do I feel like my identity and my vision for myself is? And how can I bring my gifts and my strengths and my vision to help this team, this unit be their best and to also work in partnership with them to where I am giving my best for myself and for others. And stay curious how you can keep learning and growing because Alana and I have talked about this. When I met her, I was in a spot where I had space to learn and I took advantage of tuition assistance through the military and got my master's degree. Um, so I'm constantly trying to learn and be curious on new things and see how can these supplement what I'm doing in my military career. So I found a lot of joy in not letting other people limit my potential and sort of being a pioneer with my own learning and development. So
Mhm.
that's a great question, man. And I can't wait to maybe unpack that with you in the future. Sounds like we need to jump on a coaching call and let you give me more backdrop. But Alana, hearing that question, I see you over there with like glittering
Yeah,
eyes
I'm
too.
writing some things down for.
I would love to hear maybe your thoughts in response to Frank on this.
Well, I don't know the context, but I would
That's
like to
okay.
look at the continuum. Sometimes, as you talked about the seed and growing that seed, sometimes we just need to hold steady and to be
Mm,
smart when it is we just should observe, listen actively. Curiosity is all about active immersion. Whether you're silent, that's when I'm the most active, is when I am silent and
right,
listening. That's
right.
really important. I know it's counterintuitive, but if we can learn that, it's a skill. Um, it will alter the way you perceive things and interpret what's in front of you. So sometimes we need to hold steady. On the other end of the continuum, Frank may need to think about how he is taking up the space. And taking
Hmm.
up the space could be in silence, right? But it could also be important if he holds a piece of what the team needs, a piece of information. He'll have to find a way to contribute that's meaningful and will be of value. And often with the ranking system, right? I've watched this so many times. I've watched at all levels people nodding their heads north and south as though they understand. I can tell there's just massive confusion, but no one's saying anything. So I'm often the one who will ask a question or say, "Hey, I don't understand something."
Hmm.
But if you're paying that close attention in the moment and you have a piece of knowing that will contribute to the team, think about how you will take up the space in that moment and your contributions will be heard and valued.
So, what are some things that are inadvertently or unknowingly working in opposition to curiosity in our everyday lives?
Yeah, I would say the first thing is not really knowing the role curiosity should play in our lives.
Hmm.
So it's important to unpack that, right? The desire to know or to learn something. Um, the Latin for curiosity is cura, right? It's care, it's heedfulness, to take notice, to pay attention. So, first and foremost, you really know you need to know the role curiosity could play in your life.
Mhm.
And then the flip side, not really knowing curiosity's counterpart. So, like, ask yourself, what is the counterpart to curiosity? That could be apathy, that could be complacency, indifference. Those also may be indicators for you, right? Okay, so not really knowing the role it plays in our lives, not really knowing its counterpart, not then tying it to our values. So I think
Mhm.
it will be very important if we really want to embody this, um, the importance, the worth, the usefulness of curiosity in all aspects of our lives. We need to tie it to our values. So it
Yes,
should
ma'am, we do.
could
Oh,
become a
man.
value, right?
You could land on that runway for a long time and just park it. Goodness, that's so true.
hmm
Oh,
So curiosity should drive our values, and our values should drive curiosity. So it's very interconnected. But
mhm.
I think that's really important for us to explore that from a values perspective.
An inability to, in a healthy way, in my mind, call everything into question. Um, even and sometimes especially the familiar. So when you look at, I know your space with trying to enact and empower intelligent change with the way that, let's say, Marines and large units and regiments and small units, with the way they think and frame things and make decisions and are
Yeah.
really trying to change and adapt their learning continuum as a war fighting force. How do you do that if you don't remain curious and if you aren't willing to question deeply the very familiar? Because you have a lot of experts that are rightfully experts in their trade craft. And this can apply outside the military, but especially with what we work with and what I do. Um, you have people in the combat arms or whatever, and they're pros. They've done it. And sometimes, again, when you lose that ability to stay curious like a child, and when you become in your own mind this masterful expert, you lose some of that beauty that the novice has that really desires to continue learning, and you sort of hang up your hat. And I just see it happen a lot of times in the military
Mm.
space specifically because that's what's the most familiar to me. Is that is working in opposition of genuine curiosity and growth is an inability to question the familiar and to maybe question the old graybeards that everybody has this blind deference to what they say, and they confuse at times. I think as an organization people can confuse respect and honor for authority or for leadership with the ability to be genuinely curious and ask good hard questions that really try to get to the heart of how are we aligning, like you say, our values to drive our curiosity and our growth and our constant evolution to being better than we were yesterday. And it's you can stagnate if you don't have that curious mind. So I love the way you framed that. That's what it sparked in my mind.
We should, it's so much of day to day interaction with people is a mystery. So I have to surrender to what I think is crystallized knowledge. That crystallized knowledge is important, and it can continue to become deeper and more thoughtful. But this fluid intelligence is equally as important. It's the
Mhm.
novelty. It allows us to explore perhaps in a structured or even unstructured way. And that's where new insight can take root, if you will. So and there's such a mystery with people and with our relationships and with context. Things are always changing, so we have to be mindful of that. It's really never the same situation because it's a different day and different people and a different environment, so
I
that
feel
should
like,
leave us curious at all times.
I feel like we could take that a small clip of that right there and extract it, and it would sound like we are doing like a parenting podcast. Because when you said that, I just thought of my three little girls, and if I wanted to try and tell someone what parenting was like using a single crystallized model from one of them, it would completely jump off a cliff if I tried to use that with the other two. Because I cannot do a cookie cutter parenting model for my three girls.
Mm-mm.
And that's the simplistic way I view it, but it's so true. Like I have to be curious on, okay, this way of communicating or displaying or guiding Aria works for Aria. And if I
Mhm.
try that with my little thug Karina, good luck, Chuck. It's not going to work. Or with Alessia, if I don't tap into her beautiful empathic heart and
Right.
deep emotions, I'm going to miss the boat completely. And it's a challenge. And I think a lazy person, a lazy leader, a lazy parent will be just that. They will be lazy and fall on what they know that is comfortable and familiar, and they won't be curious and also creative to be meaningful with each connection and each relationship. And I think it is about people. It boils down to the nuances of people and their behaviors and their desires. And you have to be, like you said, an active listener and curious and attentive to best serve each individual relationship and then the conglomerate of all of those together. And that's really challenging to do. So I think all of
Yeah,
that's working in
it's
opposition.
challenging on an individual level and a group level, right?
Right.
When you want to connect with individuals, meeting them where they are, you
Mm,
have to be attuned to them, to yourself as well. And
right.
then if you want that kind of effect on in a group setting, how do you connect with the group at large? And there are ways.
Yeah,
And curiosity, again, is critical to that.
absolutely.
You have to
Yes.
be.
The second part of that, which we
Okay,
started
second
dipping our
question.
toe a little bit in the pond, but it said, what are some daily practices that you use to combat the oppositions and maintain a posture of curiosity? So, as Alana, what do you do?
Well, I have to make it explicit first and foremost, right? So, how intentional am I about curiosity?
Hmm.
I have to ask myself that daily. And then, how am I modeling that? So, can other people see that? So, that's probably why you asked me to do this podcast because it's something, it's a ritual of mine. How do I maintain a posture of curiosity? So, how intentional am I about modeling curiosity?
Hmm.
Uh, and as we said, seeing the world in a new way, being open to the unknown, which I think is really beautiful. And as you mentioned, it's not a passive observation, it's very active and immersive. Uh, what you talked about earlier with, childlike, how do we acquire that beginner's mind? And get into that curiosity zone, if you will.
Hmm.
So, that might look different for each of us. But for me, the beginner's mind is I never want to um, um, think that I know something fully,
Right.
right? I always want to hold off or be sure, but not too sure,
Hmm.
So I think those, especially in the work I do as an ethnographer, so it's taken a lot of practice because I really want to hear the stories of other people in the context in which they deliver them. So that's really important. And then I guess for me, it's how does curiosity matter in conversation? So when I engage in conversation, I'm always thinking about curiosity's role.
Mm, that's good. That's
So
so good.
I just am constantly, I do ask questions, not to be that person, that just continually asks questions, but I really do want to know what people are thinking and acting and how they're feeling. Those things are important to me.
That was the first thing that drew me into you and made me curious to learn more about you, was the way that I could tell you were intelligent. And then I asked someone, who is she? And, oh, this is Dr. Nicastro, and this is where she works, and gave me the rap sheet. And I'm like, wow, that's impressive. And then to watch someone who clearly has the education and experience to bring a lot of words and intelligent sayings into a space, but then to be quick to listen and slow to speak, even though you could say a lot. I was like, what a beautiful thing to model. And I say it a lot, but it doesn't just apply to children. Things are caught before they're taught. So if you are trying to make a difference as opposed to just trying to make a point, making a
That's right.
point is cheap and easy and it's everywhere. Like,
Yep.
I almost didn't start a podcast because I'm like, oh my gosh, another podcast. But like, this was my passion project, and I love holding a space for others to connect with someone they never would, like you. So I'm not questioning it, but there's so much noise out there
Hmm.
that making a point is cheap and easy. But making a difference looks like hard work, and it looks
Making
like
a
a
difference in what, Josh?
That's a great question. Making a difference in other people's lives, in
Right,
your
right
life,
in front of you.
in the space that you're in with people first and always, of course. But even if you're looking at trying to make a difference in your organization, or which is always about people, yes, but even the way with maybe something works, or you're trying to refine a process, or mechanically you're trying to improve something. To make a difference just takes work and patience and curiosity, and it's not an easy, quick win. I get that there are quick wins, but that term is almost annoying me to no end these days because everyone's in it for the how can I gain all of these followers or all this fame or all this money. And I just have such an appreciation for someone who is diligent and consistent and curious, and sometimes can just really hold that space for the pregnant pause. Like, hey, everyone, be like Alana and master the pregnant pause. Zip the lips, open the ears, ask a question, and then actually lean in and try to understand what is being said to you without judgment, with curiosity. And that's I love that. Whether it was Walt Whitman or not, tell us the Walt Whitman thing you told me at the beginning, because that was
Well, yeah, so, it's funny, I did see that you shared the clip from Ted Lasso.
oh, it's so
Great
good.
episode, right? A
So
great
good.
episode. I think there's been some talk on whether or not Walt Whitman actually said that, "Be
Hmm.
curious, not judgmental." So, it's still open for debate whether or not he,
Sure.
actually said that, and, I'm a big, Walt Whitman fan, and I actually have two very large succulents in my house. I live in the desert, and these two succulents are as tall as I am, which doesn't say much. I'm 5'2", but their names are Walt and Whitman. And so I
Yeah.
read to them their quotes. But there's a quote that is in the vein that was shared in the movie. So, so the what maybe Ted Lasso was paraphrasing, but
Hmm.
what Walt Whitman did say is re-examine all that you have been told. Dismiss that which insults your soul. Think about how much we don't know about each other.
In the topic of curiosity, if you were to step away from this discussion together and go, man, I wish Josh or one of the listeners would have asked me this question because I would have loved to responded to this question. What would that question have been?
Yeah, I think it's what sustains this work, because as you mentioned earlier, the effort that goes into this is a labor of love.
Mm,
And really working with Marines, it's been a labor of love. I have an affinity for Marines, and um, being able to play a small part um, in the very large lives of Marines has been a gift. And where I go to, not only do I get inspired by Marines, I reflect, and then the scripture. I go back to scripture when I really want to make sense of things. And um, there's one scripture that I actually I have here that I was hoping to share that didn't come up until now, but it's one of my favorites.
Hmm.
James, actually, it's 1:4. It starts off about, let the perseverance work through your life until that work is done. But it's if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to him. So sometimes this work, I represent something very different. And it's easy to feel like a fraud or like I don't belong in this space. Never did the Marines make me feel that way. It's just my own
Sure.
insecurity. If anything, the Marines have, it's just been the opposite.
Hmm.
But that's really uh, important for me to step back and to embrace the perspective from my faith.
I'm so glad I asked you that question because that was
I hope that's
fantastic.
okay that I share that, but that's a
It's
really sacred
yes.
space for me as well, right? So the work that we do, I believe, is very sacred, and so I want to go to a sacred source
Hmm.
to feel comforted in a sense of renewal.
Absolutely, it's okay that you share it, and I think regardless of people's worldviews or faith backgrounds, because there are people of all walks and talks that I'm connected with in life, much like you, and even many who have been on this podcast and platform with me, that we don't always see eye to eye on everything, or we may not share the same faith perspective. But like you said, it's what do we really know about the people that are around us? And when we find things offensive or misaligned to what we believe, are we kind enough people and humble enough people that we still hold a space with them that is welcoming and loving and tries to make a positive difference?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that, oh, everything's okay and everyone's beliefs are just acceptable. I'm not saying there aren't like bad things in the world and there aren't things that are harmful. Please don't misinterpret that. But we let so much of our own preconceived notions and our own misunderstanding get in the way of meaningful relationships and connections. And it keeps us from being curious and it stands in opposition of some really, really great things in life that could be on the other side of our own stubbornness and our own lack of curiosity, to be quite honest. So I love that you came with that approach because, like I said, there is no divorcing Alana at work from the Alana that goes home and reflects on her own spiritual growth and
Mhm.
relationship to God. That is Alana. You don't get one without the other. I'm sorry.
It's
And
true. I
that's how
know.
it should be. And I'm challenged by that in the best of ways. So I'm so glad you shared that.
Thank you.
So before I close this out, last word over to you. Is there anything that you would like to say or share with our guests before we close out today?
Uh, well, how fortunate that you all are to work with Josh. I think that's wonderful. And if there's something that's resonated with a listener, Josh, you can give them my contact information and I would be happy to answer any further questions. Um, yeah, just, I'm very happy to be here and always willing to serve.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And as always, this is sure for the listeners, but so much of this is for my girls, for Laura, for Aria, and Alessia and Karina. I love all of you so much. And they all know you and they love you so much too. But it's
I
such a
love them
joy.
too.
I
I
know
miss them.
it's, well, come to Norway. You're always welcome. It's such a joy and a gift to be able to share these sorts of things with other people. And someone asked me that, like, oh, do you have a goal? And this sounds silly, but it's very honest. A guy that I work with, and he's in the Dutch army, and he was like, oh, I know you're doing coaching things. He's like, do you have a goal for how many like followers or this or that you want to have on different platforms? And I was like, I appreciate the question, man, but 0% do I have that target in mind. I said, I'm trying to stay consistent and do what I feel is what I'm here to do right now in this season. And I said, I do things for one day. Hopefully, my little girls can grow up and look back and say, man, that's who dad was. Like his walk married to his talk, and the people that he brought us into contact with or made these recordings and archived for us. I really needed that today. I'm so glad he did that. So we never see the fruit sometimes ever of our labors, but I'm so glad to plant seeds that maybe other people's can water, and then the increase isn't going to come from any of us anyway. I think that is very supernatural, and I can't wait for those moments that maybe I'll never see. So for these girls, as this is the first episode of Kickoff 25, please don't get it twisted to the listeners. First and foremost, this is always for my family, because that's who I live and die for. And of course, it's for all of you. So I'm so blessed that Alana was here. I'm so thankful that you could experience her. And we are about to step into next week, which is where we just apply curiosity in our everyday life. So I really hope you stay curious. And I hope, and I challenge you to maybe engage someone that you don't normally engage with, and be curious about who they are, and try to broaden and deepen your roots of community with the people that are in the circle that you see every day, and try and make those relationships meaningful, and just stay curious. I'm so glad you were here. Cheers to all of you. Enjoy your weekend. Alana, I love you so much, my friend. Thank you for joining.
I love you too. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Off the Hinges. Don't forget to follow Foundational Coaching on your favorite social media platforms. Kick off your Saturday with me tomorrow morning at Coffee and Reflections on Substack, where I'll share my reflections and stories on the weekly virtue. I'm honored to be a part of your story today, and I'm proud of your growth, my friend. I can't wait for our next time together, exploring the vault.